My name is Emily Mithner. I'm the CEO and founder of FindSpark. Very excited to be here today. So a quick little bit about us. So we're a community dedicated to the career success of people like you. So we create all sorts of career programs and resources aimed to get you one step closer to your dream career through the people you meet and the things that you learn. And here are just some fun numbers and stats about us. So we are an online and offline community, and we're first and foremost, really proud of the community that we've built in terms of people who participate in our programs, ranging from students and young professionals like yourselves to awesome speakers who come in and share their stories, and employers and companies who recruit through us. So I think numbers are fun, but I think it's best to talk about some of our community members and the impact that our community has had on them. So really quick, a few of our success stories. So starting off here, this young woman, her name is Courtney, and we recently did an event with Blue Apron. So Blue Apron recently raised a lot of money, and so they had to hire a lot of customer service professionals. So we did an event where we brought them 30 curated candidates for that role, and Courtney was one of the amazing folks who ended up getting a job just about a couple of weeks later. She was actually at the speed networking event that we hosted a couple of weeks ago. Next up we have Aaron, and Aaron was in a media role for a while, and he really wanted to get into data and analytics, and so through being a part of our community we were able to introduce him to someone at Viacom, and he's now working as a data analyst at Viacom. This is Rachel, and similar story to Courtney. We worked with Warby Parker, which is one of your companies, to produce an event to show off the culture at Warby Parker and to help them hire some intern and entry-level talent. And Rachel was someone who got an internship through that event, and she was fast-tracked to become a full-time employee, and now she actually manages the HR for the CX department. And this is Garrett, and Garrett goes to MIT, and he has participated in a handful of our past events, and he's going to be a Hustle Summit Fellow as well, which is a program you guys are a part of. So he'll be volunteering at one of our big networking events in July. So essentially my dream job is helping other people find their dream jobs. So I do that through FindSpark, and over the last year I've also been able to take everything that I've learned about careers, internships, social media, and teach that at two different colleges. So LIM College and School of Visual Arts, where I focus on all the really important soft skills like networking and public speaking and personal branding and that good stuff. So that's just a bit about me. So now I want to turn it over to you guys, and I would encourage those in the chat to also participate in this little introduction feature if you guys can chat your answers as well. So just to share where you work, what you do there, something that you're working on, so a particular project, and then your favorite social media platform and why. And so I'll just start with Danya. Why don't you start, because you kind of
and I do a lot of events in programming for companies on startup skills, compile resources, list of service providers, templates, data sets, and I also handle all our communications and our brand and social media. My favorite social media platform, I mean, I have to say Twitter. It's one of our most awesome investments, and I use it every day.
My name is Joe. I have a fashion store named Rolling Surprise. I also have a big-time job doing media as a team leader, fashion student at LIM College, majoring in fashion merchandising. And my favorite social media platform, I would say, is Instagram, because I love to get artsy and take pictures and express myself.
Great.
Hey, I'm Gabriella. So I'm a recent college grad from Georgetown. I just graduated in May. So currently what I'm working on is building my network. So also in terms of professionalism, like using different social media platforms to brand myself. So definitely working on that right now. And also, my favorite social media platform would have to be Twitter just because I find it easier to express myself in 180 characters, and it's easier to talk to people who I've never met before, especially for me within media and entertainment. So
We'll jump back, Dan. You can introduce yourself too, and then we'll come to you later.
I work at IX, which is the Spark portfolio company. IX is a media stock market. So kind of like the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ, those are our competitors. What I'm working on right now today, I was working on designing our auction process. How we, take a bunch of buyers and sellers of stock in the morning, opening auction in that stock, and figure out what the fair price to trade at is. So just working through the logistics of that. It's in the project that will be, launching probably a year or two, way far out. But in exchange for there's just crazy regulatory requirements where everything you do needs to be approved long in advance before we can build it and roll it out. So just dealing with that, just some fun. My favorite social media platform is definitely Instagram. I really use Twitter.
Yeah, I couldn't find you anywhere else, so. Right. Cool. Cool.
Hello everyone, I'm Yu, and I'm currently working in the auction platform. I'm the visualization intern. What I'm currently doing is trying to build some data visualization features into our reporting system. My favorite social media platform is LinkedIn because I'm trying to find a full-time job and there are many opportunities there.
Yes, we will be talking about that. Very great. So for those of you who are over there, if you want to, chat these things where you're working, what you do, what you're working on, and a social media platform, feel free to chat and share with that group. So a little bit about my story and how I ended up getting into startups. So I actually recently published a post on LinkedIn about some career takeaways from my 9 different internships, some of which happened in high school, but mostly in college. So I graduated in 2010, which is about when I met Danya, I think, which I'll talk more about later. But I started getting interested in social media and had an internship at Time Out New York when they were doing some pretty innovative things. They were working with Foursquare to create a Foursquare badge when that was just starting out. And so I wanted to learn more about that. So I ended up getting an internship at Gawker Media where I was doing some social media as well. And I had internships, but I was still looking for that full-time job. And so I started going to a ton of events. And I also started taking advantage of all of the networking opportunities my internship supervisor presented me with, one of which was working at a big event during Internet Week called the Webutante Ball. And so at that event, I met a lot of people, including a guy named Simon Burke, who I will talk about a little bit later, but really all through putting myself out there by going to events, getting active on social media. Twitter also became my favorite social media platform for networking, just by not focusing on what I didn't have. When I started out, I had no connections in the startup world, but just through, again, putting myself out there, going to events and networking, it was a little bit of a domino effect. And now I get to work with startups in a lot of different ways. I work with VC firms to do programs for their companies and interns, and we helped connect a lot of startups to our community members. And my second full-time job was at a startup as well. So the things that we're going to cover tonight is just talk a little bit about startup culture and what makes them different and how to excel there. We'll talk about networking, public speaking, your online presence, and then we'll also do a Q&A with Dan and share his story. And then I also want to do some goal setting and Q&A. So something that's really important to me as an educator is to make sure that you not only leave inspired after my workshops, but that you also have things you can put into action. So we'll end with that. Okay, so startup culture. So something that's really important to realize is that no matter what you do, there's going to be a lot of other people who do literally exactly what you do, right? So there are other people who are looking for a media job, who have a fashion startup, who do data visualization, tons of them, right? So ultimately, at the end of the day, what's going to separate you from everybody else is you, right? because there is only one you. How you act and your personality will have a big effect on who you meet, who wants to work with you, and ultimately what career opportunities you're presented with. So I would challenge you to embrace you, and when you're in the job hunt, which most of you are, even though you have internships, that you really think about how you will do well and what sort of companies you will do well in, and not mold yourself to fit in where you are or change kind of how you like to act to sort of please people, because ultimately you want to find a place where you can fit in being you. Because a really important thing to also remember is that opportunities come from people. Right? People like to focus on job boards and on applying online and submitting lots of resumes, but ultimately you're going to get connected to cool opportunities through people, and so you want to keep that in mind. So I mentioned Simon Burke before, and through just one interaction with him, so at that Gawker event, he is the founder of a nonprofit called Techies Give Back, and I noticed that Techies Give Back had little to no social media presence. And I thought, you know what, I don't know a ton about social media. I didn't study it technically, but I know more than maybe he does, or at least that I can do something for them. So I volunteered because I was currently just interning, still looking for that full-time job. So I volunteered my services in terms of social media help, and then also ended up helping him produce some events. And because I actually did what I said I would do, which is a big deal. A lot of people are flaky. So one thing to keep in mind at your internship in terms of doing well is, thinking about the things that you promise that you can say you can do, and actually delivering on those. So because I delivered on a lot of stuff for Simon, he introduced me to a lot of different people. So one was Danya, who you can see this opportunity of working with her and collaborating on this project came from that. He also introduced me to my future boss. So I actually got introduced to the man in the middle there right after I got a full-time job. So I think a lot of people, when presented with an intern opportunity after getting a full-time job, would say, nope, no thanks, I'm all set. I got a job, I don't need you, right? But I thought, you know what? He is so interesting. This startup is so interesting. The name is Record Setter, and they're trying to be they are a digital version of Guinness World Records. So instead of turning the opportunity down, I did it as a freelance job for about a year. And after a year of being at my first full-time job, since I had already been working with him when they raised money and were ready to hire their first community manager, he came to me and he scooped me out of my full-time job. I thought, this sounds more exciting. I had been in publishing for a while, very traditional red tape type of environment, so I was excited to move to a startup. And then he also introduced me to Dan Kazakowski, who does community at Firstmark Capital, and so through that connection, I ended up working a lot with startups as well. I've been running for the past 2 years their intern recruitment program called Firstmark Elite, where we get together, we get a lot of tech talent interns to apply kind of en masse, and then set up a whole interview day for those portfolio companies. So all of these really amazing opportunities, came from one person that I met at an event, but who I also, put myself out there to, right? And I did work. I made things happen for this person, and ultimately that led to a lot of great opportunities. So I think thinking about this kind of thing while you're interning, in the sense of, what can you do to help others to fill gaps, and realizing that, those people who you're helping, who you're connecting with, can connect you to opportunities way far down the line, right? So this happened, Danya, working together 5 years later, Dan was a year later, and this other Dan was, 2 years later. So depending on, what type of startup you're at, there might be more or less structure. So for instance, you mentioned 40 people at your company. You guys, I don't know who's out there exactly, what size companies there are, but I think what's really, really key at being at a startup, and this is something I learned through working at Record Setter, is being overly communicative because things move really, really fast, and especially if you're in an internship role where you have a limited amount of time, you want to make sure in terms of expectations that you're on the same page. And also understanding that at an internship, especially at a startup, you have such a great potential to make a really big impact. And so making sure that you and your manager and your team are on the same page about where that impact will lie. So, for me, when I was at Recordsetter, I was reporting to the CEO, and the CEO was very busy. So I had to, a lot of times, be very proactive about getting meetings, getting on his calendar, and making sure that I had the guidance that I needed to, to have the impact that he wanted to see. So I think that's something that's definitely unique about a startup, that you sometimes have to be a little more, I don't want to use the word pushy, but vocal about getting the support you need to make sure that you have the resources and have the ability to achieve what they want you to achieve. Another really important thing is to not be lazy. And so what I mean by lazy is you'll be presented with, a lot of opportunities to connect with different people, or maybe you won't, right? Maybe you're in a small startup where there's not a lot of structure, but I would encourage you, whenever you're thinking about, I don't want to reach out to that person, or I'm too tired to go to that event, just suck it up and don't be lazy, because going to that one event, making that one connection, that one coffee, that can have an enormous impact on your career. And this is just a personal example that I like to use. So I was introduced to this man, Juan Martinez, and I thought, we can just discuss meeting, through email, right? I don't need to meet up with him. I didn't want to wake up early. I didn't want to go to the Upper East Side to meet with him, but he was very insistent about meeting in person. So even myself, as the queen of networking, sometimes I don't feel like going out, right? But I am so incredibly grateful that I was not lazy that day, because Juan has become an integral part of FindSpark. He's spoken at multiple events. He's now on our advisory board and has just had a huge impact on our community and on my company. So I just think, man, if I was lazy and didn't wake up 2 hours early, I might never have made that really strong connection through meeting in person. So the biggest thing I want you guys to take away from this is that your network is the most valuable thing you will ever have in your career. Because at the end of the day, again, these opportunities come from people, and the stronger network you have, the easier it will be to get things done, because you will have more people who want to help you. And how nice would it be if you never had to look for a job, because the jobs always came to you? Dream world, right? But that's the kind of thing that can happen if you're building these connections consistently and then maintaining them as well. Okay, so on to networking. So I wanted to talk a little bit about my personal experiences in terms of being at a small company versus a big company, because depending on where you are, you might have to fight a little bit harder or be a little more proactive about reaching out and forming mentor-mentee relationships. So at my first job at Sterling Publishing, which was actually owned by Barnes & Noble, so it's kind of a mid-sized company, about 200 people, but it had a big parent company. So they actually had a structured mentorship program. So a lot of companies might have something where they do events like these, they set up mentor-mentee relationship programs, they do lunch and learns, things like that. And if they have something like that, take advantage of it. I've also met some people who have reverse mentor, mentee kind of programs at their company as well. And so, one idea that I'd put out there too, especially if you're at a startup, is if there is no sort of formal mentoring program, see if you can work with whoever is in people ops or people in culture, whatever they like to call it, and see if maybe that's something that you can help them develop while you're there as an intern. So again, if you're at a bigger company, you have more opportunities. And also, if you're at a bigger company, it might seem easier to make connections because there's just more people to connect with, right? So at Sterling, they were really great in the sense of connecting the mentor and mentees in different departments. So somebody asked in the questionnaire ahead of time, how can I get to know the product really well and the business really well so I can do well? And I think one of the things you can do is to meet with people who are not just people you directly work with. But if you're at a smaller company, you might think, well, it's just me and 5 other people. Or, you know, it's me, the CEO, and the CTO, right? So if you are at a smaller company where you feel like, well, I've met everybody, we have lunch together every day, you might have to put a little more work into it, but there's still opportunities to utilize your colleagues' network. So when I was at Recordsetter, my boss was really great about helping me connect with people who could mentor me in realms that, you know, he was not familiar with. So I would actually sometimes, you know, go through his LinkedIn profile and say, hey, you know, this person looks really interesting, or hey, you know, I want to learn more about this, and I see you have a second-degree LinkedIn connection. Would you be able to introduce us? So if you feel like you've met everybody you can at your current company, start thinking about who can your current colleagues connect you with outside of the company. And that could be, you know, partners, collaborators, or just, you know, maybe they have friends from college they connect you with. So I think another big thing people have, or big issue people have with networking is just starting the conversation, right? So what do I say? I got a head nod there. So these are some really simple openers, and I will send these slides. You guys will all have access to these slides afterwards. That they seem really simple, but they work. Right? So when you're at an event, you know, asking someone what brought you here, how did you find out about the event? What did you think of the talk? Also cheesy, but when you're standing in line for food or drinks or the bathroom, there's nowhere else to go. So you might as well turn around to the person behind you and say, oh, like, what are you getting? What drink are you ordering? And then, you know, just asking about, hey, whatever the theme of the event, you know, are you that type of person? Another tip that is not on here that I've learned to be very successful is when you're in an event where there's a lot of people, find uneven groups of people, so like groups of 3 or groups of 5, and kind of wiggle in by starting a conversation with the person who looks least engaged in that current conversation, right? So a lot of times people are in a group, maybe a couple people are chatting really intently, and you can see there's someone like on the side hanging out, so you can kind of walk up and say, oh, hey, like, how do you guys know each other, right? And then so you break off, and then you kind of ease into that circle. So just as important, or I think even more important than openers, are closers. Nobody likes closing, right? Closing a networking conversation can be so awkward. So one of my biggest networking tips is to be the closer, because the conversation has to end at some point. So if you're the one to end the conversation, not only will you, be able to move on to someone else, but the person you're talking to will be very thankful because nobody likes to do it. So here are also a bunch of very simple conversation escape methods. And these are, being a closer doesn't mean, just closing conversations you're not enjoying, but, again, you have to close every conversation at some point. When you're at networking events, people expect to talk to a lot of different people, so it's fine to move on, to say things like, I don't want to keep all your time, I'm going to go mingle around, but it was great meeting you, exchange cards. But so I started the first one because I think the best way to close a conversation is to actually take that person who you're speaking with and introduce them to someone else. Because not only does that close a conversation, but it helps initiate a new conversation. So I don't mean just saying, okay, well, I'm done here, Joe, meet Jane, bye, right? But thinking about who have I met and how can I find a common, bond between these two. And it could be related to their career. Oh, this person also works in data. This person also works at a startup. Or it can be something like, hey, oh, you guys went to the same school, you have to meet. Or you're both from Astoria, you should connect and, chat about why you love it there, right? So don't be a sloppy connector, but, give some context there so the person understands why you're making that connection. And the other big tip in terms of networking that I strongly, strongly believe in is to be generous. So by that, I mean, think about how you can help other people. Even as an intern, you have your own network and you have things of value, right, to add to the world, and taking time to congratulate other people, to recognize other people's work, and to make connections for other people, via in-person events or email, I think is what will ultimately end up getting you more connections, because by supporting others, others will be more willing to support you back. So, just a few examples of, say, for instance, on Twitter, right? When you have a big team project, acknowledging other people who are part of that project and that success. So this young lady over here, this is Taylor. She's someone I hired as an intern last summer. She was so aggressive about reaching out to us on social media, I literally could not ignore her. I ended up hiring her, and now she has kept in touch very consistently by tweeting, messaging us, like sending quick emails, oh, you should check this out, and that kind of thing. So just being nice and giving people sort of digital pats on the back can prove to be a great way to stay in touch. And by the way, we're at almost 5,000 Instagram followers now. And then the next piece of advice is to stay on people's radar. And one of our workshops coming up at the end of the summer is focused more on maintaining your network. But I really want to emphasize that every post, every update on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Instagram, that is a way for you to stay on people's radar. And you never know where that little notification can lead. And by little notification, I mean, what is the first thing you do when you log on to any social media network? What do you usually do first? Yeah, check notifications, right? Because no one can deny that little red dot that says, oh my gosh, someone acknowledged my existence. Who was it, right? So little things like liking posts on LinkedIn, liking Instagram posts, by doing that, they might take the time to check out your profile, see what you're up to, and then think, oh my gosh, I forgot I have the perfect opportunity for her. I'm going to reach out. And then you get a job just from an Instagram like, right? It can happen. The other thing I hear a lot from people is not really knowing the etiquette or how to reach out to connections that they might have made a long time ago and had sort of faded in terms of the maintenance of the connection. And people get really obsessed with, how often do I follow up, right? Okay, so I had an internship. Do I send a, hi, how's it going email once a week, once a month, every 6 months, every semester? What do I do? And I think it's more important to just think about people when it happens naturally, and then take those natural moments of, oh, hey, I think this person would appreciate this, or, oh, I just realized I can be helpful to this person in a way. And to reach out to them then, and not be afraid to reach out if you have a reason to, even if there's been a long silence. So this is Mackenzie, and this is a picture of us from 2010. Yes, 2010, so we were interns together at Time Out New York, and we ended up friending each other on Facebook, but had no real conversations or interactions for the next 5 years, basically, 4 or 5 years. But I still saw her updates, and I saw that she was at BuzzFeed, and she posted this, that she had, got a great promotion. She's younger than me. She's a senior lifestyle editor at BuzzFeed, and wanted suggestions for blogs and people she could potentially profile and write about. So even though I hadn't talked to her for years, I took that as a reason to say, oh, you know what, I'm going to reach out to her because I have a lot of friends with blogs that I think she would like. So I reached out, and she said, thanks so much, and now we, rekindled that connection a little bit. So don't force it, but when you find an opportunity where you can add value, do it, and don't be afraid even if there's been a long gap. Okay, so next up, one of my favorite topics, public speaking. I see the dread in your eyes now. So it is so, so important to be able to speak well. Speak well in front of a small group, to your boss. I definitely realize that, literally most of America would rather be dead than standing where I am right now. So if you feel like that too, it's okay, it's totally normal. But if you want to excel, you need to be comfortable talking in a lot of different environments and settings. And these are some of the biggest things that I've found matter in terms of making a good impression. So number one is handshake. It is very often your first point of contact with anyone. And there's no quicker way to make someone uncomfortable by offering one of these, weak, oh my God, I feel like I just hurt them, So it sounds silly, but practice a good handshake. Whenever someone shakes my hand and it feels weird, I make them do it again, right? And normally what I say is if you feel like you're squeezing a little bit too hard, you're probably good, right? So you want to give a couple of pumps. The next thing is posture. You might not realize it, but the way you sit, the way you stand, how you present yourself in terms of body language is enormously important. People care more about how you look when you're saying something than they care about what you're actually saying. I don't know if anybody remembers this, but there was a Super Bowl commercial that I will never forget. It was for Shout wipes or Shout sticks. A guy was in an interview and he had on, a shirt with a pocket, and the pocket had a stain on it. And so he's sitting across from the interviewer, and as he's talking, every time the guy interviewing starts to talk, the stain goes blah, 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 and it just keeps getting louder and louder because it was just trying to say, like, all the interview was looking at was its stain, right? And so I think the same goes for, the way you're physically presenting yourself in terms of your clothes, your demeanor, but really your posture. So, to think about making yourself bigger, standing up straight, shoulders up, all that kind of stuff, very important. The next is filler words. We all have them. I do this for a living, and I still say I still say and like. I'm trying to get better at it. One thing I will challenge you all to do, which I just use is to think about your filler word of choice. It's different for everyone. I was actually just listening the other day to one of my colleagues on a sales call, and I realized that her filler words of choice is kind of, which is not really a common one, but she was just using it over and over again. I thought, man, if she just pulled that kind of out of every sentence when she uses it, she would sound so much more confident, especially as a young professional, when you're an intern or you're just starting out. Using words like and is just the easiest way to seem even younger than you are, which you don't want. And then the next thing is energy. Again, pointing out the fact that you're going to be competing with people who have very similar experience to you. One way to stand out is to show your passion and to show your energy for whatever you're talking about, whether that be in a casual setting or in an interview. And it's also true, like what I mentioned before with body language, is how you say things is so important. Again, people care more about that. The data says it. People care more about how you say things and your energy than what you're actually saying. So you want to make sure that you are enthusiastic in all settings. So I just wanted to take a little bit of time to practice together. So since it's a small group, I would love to just put everyone on the spot, which I'm sure you all hate. But thinking back to what we've just talked about, so besides handshake, we can practice that later, but posture, filler words, and energy. And I won't make you guys stand, but to maybe put everyone on the spot and just share a little bit in detail a recent project, like 30 seconds or less. Just talk about a project that you've worked on recently, like a little more in depth than you just did in your intro, and whatever your filler word is, don't use it. And two of my suggestions for getting rid of filler words are, one, whoever you spend the most time with, friend, boyfriend, family, roommates, tell them you're working on this and tell them to give you a little slap every time you use your filler word. And the number two tip is to speak slower. It's fine to pause, it's fine to think, and it's called filler word for a reason. People get uncomfortable when there's silence, and they use these ums, likes, whatevers to fill that silence, but don't be afraid to pause. Dramatic pauses can be very effective. So I'm going to start with the young lady who walked in, since we haven't put you on the spot at all yet. So you can, introduce yourself, let us know where you work, and maybe just tell, 20, 30 seconds about a project you're working on.
Okay, sure. I guess I just need the introduction. I'm Jenny, and I work at Splash. I'm from Swarthmore College. I'm a rising senior, so I'm going to graduate soon. Looking forward to that. Well, so recently we're working the design for a main tool, our main product. It's a website building tool for building Splash pages. It's the event page that you see, inviting you to come here. So I'll be working on the tools that you use to build that page. And we're still working on it, collecting user data, and I'm a developer intern, so I'm going to design and implement that.
That's great. Great job. That was really good. A few filler words in the beginning, but once you got into it, you were great. That was awesome. Very cool. We'll go back to Dan.
All right, I'm Dan. Can I introduce myself again?
Well, you can just tell us the.
Okay, so a project I worked on recently, the last week, I'm working on a signal for order type, on our matching engine. Basically, one of the main purposes of that's kind of one of our pillars of our philosophy is to ensure that all trades that happen on our platform are fair, to ensure that every single participant, whether it's a mutual fund or a pension fund or an individual investor or a high-frequency trader, if you're outside the industries where it's might be anything, but many different types of participants in the stock market. Companies or individuals who buy and sell stocks, who are trying to invest their wealth to grow their wealth, put it somewhere safe, or show that they support a company, and hopefully sharing the success of that company, things like that. And the interaction between all those different types of participants happens on the stock markets, the New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, AEX. And so, because one of our pillars is fairness, ensuring that all of them meet on fair terms all the time, we build order types, do a lot of data analysis to understand how different types of participants interact with each other, how they interact with the stock market as a whole. And so that's a big part of my job is looking at the data, trying to understand what they're doing. So the project we're working on recently was working on optimizing a signal that goes into one of our order types. Basically looks, hey, the market's about to move. Any trades that happen at this old price are probably unfair trades because the market's going to be higher in a split second. So we don't want to allow trades to happen at this lower price because if someone sells stock at a lower price and it's not really the fair value of the stock is a higher price, they could have sold it for more if they just waited. And they basically got taken advantage of by this really smart buyer. And so we use a signal to detect when that situation is about to happen. And in those situations, we try to protect our seller, try to protect our buyers. It's working on ours.
Great. So something I loved about Dan's was his hands. It really showed a lot of great energy just by using his hands a little bit. So yeah, that was awesome. Cool. Okay, you want to go ahead?
Okay. Recently, I changed my business strategy. As I started, I was focusing on spending a lot on products, and I changed my business strategy. I'm focusing more on building a brand. So as I first started my brand, I had an idea of, I wanted to represent entrepreneurs, but I was kind of getting away from it, and I came up with this strategy where I wanted to, like the most successful entrepreneurs, I wanted to have them sketch. So I called my assistant, person that helps me with my sketches, and we came up with the sketch with Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, and Jay-Z. And I dressed them up, styled them, and I think it was successful to join, actually.
Great. Very cool. Awesome. You speak nice and slow, which I like, right? Okay. Because a lot of people rush, and I think that's a big mistake people make because they feel nervous and they just want to get through it. So I like that you sound like nice and calm and cool and confident, which is great.
Okay. Okay, so one of the recent projects that I recently worked on was when I was in school, there was a need for a fashion event just because there wasn't any at the school. So I was part of the organization called African Society of Georgetown, and within that, I was able to implement that idea to the president, who okayed it after sending him a proposal that I had sketched. And after that, I was able to come up with a group of 4 to 5 people, a team, that was able to help me create a budget. They was also able to help me find clothing in which different designers were able to donate, as well as finding a venue so we can have the project in. And overall, it was successful. For the first year, we made sure it was free to accommodate people in terms of, I don't really know what this is, but I'm gonna go anyways. So with the first year, we had about 150 participants come and see the fashion show, and then we started to grow, 200. Our last year was about 350 students from across Washington, D.C. So.
That's great. Very cool. I feel like so relieved afterwards, right? So another thing that I noticed a lot, so I mentioned I teach, and a big thing with getting them to speak is people have a hard time ending, and they actually end a lot with "so yeah." So that's a big thing to think about too, is just ending and being confident with closing your thought. But that was an excellent story, by the way. Good project.
The project that I'm really working on is come up with some graphs for client reports, because currently most of the reports provided by us to our clients is the data files, such as Excel files. So I'm trying to create some nice graphs based on the data we already have, so that the clients can get more insights from the graphs. And
Cool, no, that's great. Round of applause for everyone for doing that. It's not easy to talk in front of a group. So one of the biggest things with all this is just to practice and give yourself different environments to practice in. I always think back to the early days of The Sims. I haven't played in a while, but they used to be able to get charisma points by practicing in the mirror, right? It sounds silly, but just practice out loud. And this is especially important if you have a meeting with a boss, if you have an interview, practice telling those stories, because those stories are what's going to support, you know, yes, I know how to do X, Y, Z, but give me a real example of doing that. All right, so moving on to online presence. So before saying anything, I think it is so important to emphasize how there is no one blueprint for how to network online, for how to put yourself out there. It is so important to think about what your goals are first, and then think about, you know, how can you use these tools to reach those goals, because it's going to be different for everyone. And a big part of being successful with your online presence, your online branding, is that you actually enjoy doing it. So, personal example, I had the goal for myself when I graduated that to become a social media expert, needed to blog at least 3 times a week about things going on in the world of social media. I set that goal for myself, built a WordPress site, and it lasted, you know, maybe 2 weeks tops. I just got really overwhelmed sitting there in front of, you know, the blank WordPress page, and started to fall in love with Twitter. I felt like Twitter was easy, it was quick, and it was so amazing to be able to connect with people so quickly and easily, like you mentioned, right? With big people, my peers, you know, everyone. And, you know, to this day, I rarely blog. Maybe on my personal blog post, you know, a few times a year, but I have 5,000 Twitter followers. So, you know, I think it's just an example of figuring out what platform you can best integrate into your daily life. And on that note, another thing people get really overwhelmed with is, what do I say? What do I write about? Nobody's going to want to listen to me. I don't have anything to say. But you are already all, I am sure of it, consuming so much content from so many different platforms. So instead of being obsessed with what are people going to want me to say, just post when you find something interesting. Post when you feel like you've found an article that would be helpful. You know, tweet at 2 people when you feel like it would be helpful to connect them. Do things naturally and don't feel like you have to, you know, create this whole nother level of content to put yourself out there. Just use what you're already consuming. And some really big, easy tips. So LinkedIn is huge. If you don't have a LinkedIn, you need to have a LinkedIn. And this is something where I'm kind of going back on what I just said in terms of, you know, do what works for you. I really do think everybody needs to have at least a basic LinkedIn. It's very important, I think, no matter what industry you're in. And a couple of big tips with LinkedIn. So number 1 is that you can make a custom URL. If you guys didn't know that, right? So instead of having the default with a bunch of letters and numbers, you can put your name. If you have a common name, you can come up with some sort of alias or that sort of thing. But this is much better than the default because you can put this on a resume, right? You can link to it on your email signature. You can write it out and it'll look very nice. So that's an easy one. The next tip is something that I personally just learned, and I'm curious if you know this as a community person. did you know that you can download all of your LinkedIn connections as an Excel file?
Yeah.
Amazing,
Pretty amazing.
right? So, of course, obviously LinkedIn is a great tool for, typing in a company and see if anyone you know works there, but it can be a little bit cumbersome to search through your own network on LinkedIn, so it's kind of a hidden gem. They don't really promote this very much, but if you just, ooh, that's my phone. So if you just Google download LinkedIn connections, it's like a one-button process. So that's just something that's useful for, every so often, download your connections. You can easily see like who works where, what titles do they have. You can do a control find to see who's got the word data in their title, right? You could probably make some fancy visualization of all your connections. So 2 really easy, quick to implement tips there. The next thing is to just think about your usernames. So I just bring up Twitter as an example, but obviously any platform you're on, you're going to have to come up with a username. And these are examples kind of, ideal to not ideal, right? So I think whenever possible, it's really great to be able to have your name on all these platforms. But of course, not everybody has an uncommon name. So you can do things like add, hey in front of it. You can add, initials and things like that. But just be cognizant of my rule of thumb for handles and account names and that kind of thing is you should be able to say it to someone at an event and they shouldn't be confused, right? So, my issue with this person's name is that there's like if she just said that to me, oh snap, it's T or Ty, like it could be written a gajillion different ways, right? So not good. And then Justine, awesome community member, but this looks like an AOL screen name from 1998. So make it easy to remember, make it consistent, and if possible, be consistent across all your platforms. So your website, your domain, your LinkedIn, Twitter, all that good stuff. Another really important thing is to think about your bios on all these platforms. You want to give people as much information as possible, so when they're clicking on your profile, they're learning more about you and not getting frustrated because there's no link and there's no information. So I think a really good template, regardless of what platform you're writing for, is what you're doing, what you've done, and something fun. So what you're doing, entertainment professional, intern at the Orchard, what you've done. So what was your previous internship? Where did you go to school? What sort of club leadership activities did you do? And then something fun. People, again, want to know who you are as a person, and so putting in things like love skiing and nature, or triathlon, or but just give something for people to have as a talking point, because connecting on that human level, in an everyday setting, in a networking setting, in an interview setting, just makes things so much more simple and kind of easy. So always try to think of what sort of fun thing that you can add. But then also, especially in places where you have more room, so say like LinkedIn, one of my big tips is to move your LinkedIn summary to the top and tell people why you do what you do. The amazing thing about your online presence is that you have total control over what people are learning about you and what your story is. And you really want to take advantage of that. So, talking about why are you interested in data? What got you into that, right? How did you start out as a programmer? Why are you interested in fashion? What about media are you interested in? Give people that extra story so that they can get an understanding for why you do what you do. Another simple tip is rich media. So this is a newer now, I feel like it's a couple years old, but not a lot of people are taking advantage of it. So you guys are all creators, right? You're creating things, you have projects that you've worked on. So put evidence of those projects in your LinkedIn. You can add videos, you can add website links, PDFs, slide shares. Just give people more context about the work and projects that you've done. So on Twitter and just in general, connecting with people and connecting with brands. This is what I think is an example of a perfect tweet. I think it has 5 elements of a perfect post, and I'll tell you what those elements are. So number 1 is having a hashtag. So whenever possible, especially if you're tweeting or posting it about an event or a current event, if there's a hashtag, pay attention. If there's something you can use to insert your conversation into, or your comment into a larger conversation. The next is to both mention the person behind whatever you're talking about, in addition to the company. Because, most likely a big company or even a mid-sized company, they might not see your @mention. There's a much, much higher chance that the actual person will. So a good way to think about this is, when you find articles that you're reading that you like, that you post, instead of saying, great article via New York Times, take an extra second to figure out who is that tech reporter at the New York Times who wrote that article and @mention them. The next fourth element is the photo. So every network now, if you include a photo in it, your post is going to see way more action, whether it's LinkedIn, Twitter, or Facebook. Facebook actually video now, right? So include rich media when you can. And then the fifth thing is show some personality. And to that, I will point to the emojis, right? So you're allowed to have fun. You're allowed to show your personality. And you can see this tweet was actually favorited by the company she mentioned, MRY. And I would like to say that maybe not the specific tweet, but because Nancy did such a great job connecting with MRY through, on her own terms and through the FindSpark community, she is currently interning at MRY, and that is her dream internship. Another really important thing, though, to think about when posting, and these are screenshots of one of the Spark Capital team members, John, is to add in your own opinion, right? And tell people a little bit about why you're posting something. So there are a lot of different ways, that you can tweet. So you can, write your own tweets straight up. You can retweet other people, of course, and now this is a bit of a new function. When you retweet someone, you can have just as much space, I think 140 characters, to add your own comment above. And you can see John here does a good job at mixing up kind of all formats. So you don't want to just be all retweets. You don't want to just all be talking about yourself. So, mix it up every so often so people can get a little insight into your view, why you're posting the things that you're posting. And so one thing, of course, I'm sure you're all busy, right? You're job hunting, you're going to school. Job hunting is a full-time job. You're working and you still have to job hunt. And you might want to have a life and see your friends or run a triathlon, right? There's a lot of things you're probably doing day to day, and so it can be really overwhelming to think about putting yourself out there, going to another event, meeting up with another person for coffee. But I guarantee you that if you spend more time, or you invest the time and effort into networking online, into your online presence, you're going to actually save time. And I know it's a little counterintuitive, but it's kind of one of those, theories of you have to spend time to save time, right? Spend money to make money. But if you're not networking, if you're not putting yourself out there on these platforms, you are going to hands down miss out on opportunities. And you don't want that to happen to you. Right? Like I said in the beginning, what dream world would it be to always have opportunities come to you, right? And by doing these sort of things, that will happen to you more and more. And the other really important thing is to just start as soon as possible with all these things. Don't wait until you feel like you need something. Okay, now I need a job, so I'm gonna go to the event, or I need an internship, so I guess I'll meet that person for coffee, or I'll start tweeting, okay, because my school is almost over. The thing is that number one, you're never going to feel 100% confident or comfortable in whatever you want to do, right? I don't know enough about this platform. I'm not good enough yet. You'll have all these excuses. So just forget it and just start in that respect. But the other reason you have to start now is because shit takes a long time. Things take time to form. Relationships, the connections that I mentioned earlier on, those have been connections and relationships have been building for years, right? The job hunt takes a really long time. As a recent grad, as even someone when you get further in your career, just these things take time. So you want to start when you don't need things and as soon as possible, so that that time period shrinks. And then the other thing to remember is that you are in more control over your career than you probably realize. You're in more control over your network and over the opportunities that come to you. One of the reasons I started FindSpark is because I was really sick of people focusing on the doom and gloom that is job hunting, that is the job market. Things are getting better, but say in 2008, right? No one could get a job, impossible. There are so many tools at your disposal. There are so many ways for you to connect with people. You're in an amazing city right now. You guys are in amazing cities as well. You really want to take advantage of that. No one is stopping you from creating an amazing network. So just keep that in mind as time goes on, that you really are in full control over all those things. And this isn't an accident. I'm including this slide again because I think it's really, really important to drive home the fact that that network that you are building, that you need to take ownership of building, that is the most valuable thing that you will ever have. Your skill sets, of course, are important, but it's people who are going to be able to connect you to opportunities to use those skill sets.